Hello, my name is Mubarak Wasim and welcome to another Hedonic design tutorial. In today's tutorial we're going to be taking a look at creating an add to cart button. This is something that a lot of people use and need on an everyday basis. For example, those who have websites, those who sell anything online, always need these buttons, and it's very useful to have them in your arsenal and to be able to design them. So I'm going to go and take a look at a document that I've opened up here that I've called button. And what I'm going to do is create a rounded rectangle. I'm going to if you press U, you go onto the shapes, and if I hold click on the shape, I get a different set of tools. You can also cycle through the tools by holding Shift and then pressing U to different shapes. But I'm going to go for a rounded rectangle with a 10 pixel radius. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this one button background. I'm then going to drag out my button to the sort of size that I want there. Now, because this tutorial is going to have a few layers, I'm going to use folders, and I haven't used folders in any of my tutorials so far. Basically, if you haven't used folders before, they're really easy. Just next to the new layer button, on the left hand side of the new layer button, is a button. Here, you click that and you create a group. You double click on the word group and you get to rename your group. So I'm going to call this one button, and I'm going to drag button BG into it. So now we have a nice folder, and I can delete this layer. What I'm now going to do is trim, image trim, just to remove the transparent pixels around the button so we know exactly what we're working with. I'm then going to create a new layer while clicking on the button background layer, which will create it directly above the background layer, but still in the folder. And I'm going to get the text layer, and I'm going to click here and say add to cart, and of course I'm going to make the text white just so we can see it. Now I'm going to add some text effects to that and also to the background. So one thing to decide when you're working with something like this is colour. Colours that work really well together are things like green and a blue, or a green and a yellow, but I'm going to use a blue and an orange. So I'm going to double click, if you see here on the actual layer thumbnail, and I'll just drag this here so you can see it. I'm going to be creating a gradient overlay, and I'm going to use as my dark color a nice neutral blue. And then, just to make my life easier, instead of double clicking on the white and then having to select the blue again and all sorts of problems might befall me, I am instead going to click on my blue and then click again near the white, hold on the white, drag it up to delete it. So now we have a flat colour. Click on this and just alter the colour there slightly. So I have something like this, which is a nice gradient. It gives the button a nice sort of almost beveled but not quite beveled look to it. And if I reduce this, if I can change the angle of this gradient, do whatever I want, but I'm going to keep it at 90 degrees and linear. I'm now going to reselect my text layer, and I'm going to put a few effects on that. So the first effect I'm going to do is, if I double click to the right of the words add to cart, I'll bring up the layer styles panel. I'm going to add a gradient overlay, and a colour that I said I was going to use was an orange, a nice, not a yellowy orange or too much of a reddy orange, a nice middling orange. And again, use the same technique. After pressing OK, click here again, and then just change this slightly by bringing it up perhaps a bit more yellow, something like that. And actually I'm going to edit this colour because I think it's a bit too brown right now, so I'm going to bring it over here and a tiny bit more yellow. Just show you there, I'm making it, it was here before, a bit browny, so I'm going to bring it over to the white and bring it up to the yellow. And the next effect I'm going to add is a drop shadow. Now, a quick tip here, a lot of people, when they're doing drop shadows, have a tendency to mess around with all these things and try and make it something like this. And I've got to say, things like that don't look that good. Something like this, for example, is a perfectly valid text effect, but in my opinion, it doesn't look that good. What I like doing is setting the size to 0 and setting the distance to 1 or 2. So you have a little bit of depth, but not too much. So I'm going to set the distance to 1. And I'm going to change the blend mode to... Actually, I'm going to keep it as multiply, but just reduce the opacity there. So it's just a tiny bit of a drop shadow. Not too much, but just a small bit of a drop shadow. Like so. And so something like this is pretty much what I'm looking for. The next thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm going to create a new element here, and I'm going to call this, I think we'll call it tick. So just to add a bit of extra oomph to our design, I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'm going to call this layer, if I just click on it here, I'm going to call this layer tick. And I'm going to hold shift and click U, and I'm going to go back to our shapes, and I'm going to choose from the default Photoshop shapes a tick, that one right there. And holding on the layer, I'm just going to create a simple tick like that. And here's a nice tip to make sure everything is centered. I'm going to click on my background layer, because now that I've trimmed it, I know that this button background is exactly the middle. I'm going to click Control T, and that'll bring up the points, and then I'm going to hit Control R or Command R. That'll give me some rulers, and these are just guides that you snap on and snap off. So I'm going to snap a ruler right here to the middle here, and don't worry, the guide snaps, so you don't have to be too precise. The guide will automatically hold it there, and then I'm just going to hit Enter. And don't worry, this isn't part of the final design. This is just something that you can do to help you see where you are. And you can hit Control or Command colon to hide them and reposition them. And the reason that we have used these guides is just to help us position everything. So if I click on the Add to Cart layer, hold Control or Command and click on the tick layer, I can then Control click them both and position them. So the new rulers will snap to accommodate both layers and do that. So the first thing obviously I want to do is move the tick out of the way and move the Add to Cut button there. Then click them both and Control T and just move this until this here is lined up. And I'm just going to position them until they're in the middle. And now that they're in the middle, we'll leave them how they are. Now the next thing I want to do is add some quick effects to my tick. So I'm going to do the same, some of the same effects. In fact, a good place to start would be to right click on this Add to Cart layer and select Copy Layer Style. I'm not sure if you can see that here, but Copy Layer Style is one of the effects below sort of this section here. It's the third from the bottom. And click on the tick layer, and you should be able to see that Paste Layer Style, and that will give me exactly the same layer style that I have there. A good place to start. But I'm going to change that, and instead of orange, I'm going to do another nice colour that goes well with blue. I'm going to make this a nice light green colour, and I'm going to click OK, sort of about there. Also, green is always a safe colour to go for when you're doing any sort of tick. Green is a confirmatory colour. And I'm going to do the same gradient technique that I've showed you before, so do that and then just pick a lighter colour, slightly lighter. There we go. So that's our basic Add to Cart done. What I'm going to do now is a couple of embellishments. So I'll go to canvas size and I'll increase the width. By the way, I went to canvas size by doing image canvas size or Control Alt C. And I'm going to change the width to 400. And by the way, just as a quick note, if you want to change the canvas size in a specific way, so for example, if I go here and change the canvas size, and I change the width of the canvas size, it will only change the canvas that way. If I go here, it will only change the width that way. If I go here, it will only change the height that way and the width that way. Something simple. So we're going to keep it in the center, and we're going to change the width to 400. And the reason, in fact, let's make that a bit bigger, so Control Alt C for the canvas size. The reason we're going to make that a bit bigger is because we're going to add another element to our Add to Cart button, which is quite popular on a lot of Add to Cart buttons these days. And that is a couple of hand-drawn human elements. So I'm going to take away my tick there. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my tick into my button folder. Just drag it up to the top. That way we have a nice organization. And I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this arrows. Ticks and arrows are very, very useful on hand-drawn, on Add to Cart buttons. They add a lot to them. The next thing I'm going to do is on this layer, I'm going to go to my brush tool, and I'm going to select a small brush of 100% hardness, and I'm going to make it a nice red, and I'm going to just if I set the opacity to 100%, hand draw an arrow. Now at the moment, if I take away the rulers, that looks, well, it looks pretty awful. So I'm going to zoom in to 350% and spend the time to draw this carefully. So there's one of my arrows. And what I'm going to do, just to cheat, is simply duplicate that with Control or Command J, go back to 100%, and take the duplicated layer over here. And just for a bit of added oomph, I'm going to go to where it says width and height, and I'm going to click -100 for the width and -100 for the height. And just drag that layer up a little. And that is a very simple Add to Cart button. I'm going to save that. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please leave a comment and let me know what you want me to design next. I am very happy that you've joined me on this tutorial, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you again soon.